Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of the ENSign podcast. My name is David Asiedu. I'm a partner in the dispute resolution practice of ENS Africa Ghana. These days, we cannot listen to the business news or podcasts, read the newspapers, or even go on LinkedIn without hearing about private equity, venture capital, hedge funds, the so-called alternative investments. Most of us know that private equity involves essentially a stage with three actors: the investor, who gives money to an investment fund, and then the investment fund, which uses the money to buy a stake in a business with 1 million conditions. But how does private equity really work? Private equity should interest not only investors, it should interest business owners too. It is reported that private equity investment funds invested trillions of US dollars in businesses in 2021 alone, and the numbers keep rising. Private equity represents an avenue for funding businesses alternative to the traditional avenues such as banks. Today, we will discuss private equity from a Ghanaian perspective. Our guest is Nanaya Ahmed. Nanaya is a partner in the Corporate and Commercial Practice Group of ENS Africa Ghana. Private equity is one of her areas of specialization, and we are very excited to have her in the hot seat today. Nanaya, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David.
So let's jump right into it. I've been asked to change, let's jump right into it. I'm always saying, let's jump right into it. Let's jump right into it. And my first question is, in simple terms, what's private equity?
You didn't give me an opportunity to say hello to the people who listen to you. But anyway,
Nanaya, that's your opportunity. You can say hello to the people who listen to you.
Don't worry. I'll go jump right in. So private equity is an arrangement where companies invest in other companies for a specific period of time and exit. For private equity, there's always an exit. The average lifespan of a private equity investment is about 10 years. The company doing the investing is called the fund. The company in which the fund is investing is called the portfolio company.
Okay.
These funds are managed by people we call fund managers.
Mm-hmm.
And are funded by people we call investors. So when you hear private equity, these are the usually four things you hear. You'll hear the fund, the portfolio company, the fund managers, and the investors. There are other parties, or there could be other parties, but in Ghana, these are the things. And I say a company that invests in portfolio companies, a fund. That's because in Ghana, for now, only companies are licensed or can be licensed as private equity funds. In other jurisdictions, they are primarily limited partnerships, but we don't have that here. So that's in summary what private equity is.
So you said that only companies are licensed to be involved in the investment side of private equity. Do you have a number? How many companies are currently licensed in Ghana?
There should be about 4, maybe 5. Off the top of my head, I know there's Njaro, Ghana. I know there is Mrepa Capital SME Fund 1. There's Oasis Africa VC Fund. There's Wangara Green Venture Capital. So off the top of my head, these are the ones I can tell you. Yeah.
So my next question, traditionally, you would imagine that a business owner looking for money to expand would look to a bank for a loan. Why should they at least consider venture capital? Sorry, not venture capital, private equity funding. The reason I ask is you just said that the private equity funds come in, invest, and then exit, and that the average time span is
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
But they could also get an 8-year or 10-year bank loan. So what are the reasons anybody should, a business owner should think about private equity rather than a bank? And what are essentially the pros and cons?
Okay, so number one, I'd say that it's an opportunity for companies that find it difficult to get funding in the more traditional ways, such as loans, etc., to obtain capital for their businesses. For startups, it's a good way to obtain investments without taking on too much debt at an early stage. The terms of PE are quite usually a bit more flexible, I'd say, than the traditional means of funding. I mean, right now, look at our current economy, look at the interest rates that banks are giving. It's quite high. I mean, that's not the purpose. I won't go too much into that. So that's number one. Secondly, private funds or private equity funds have an incentive to see that the companies they invest in, the portfolio companies, I'm going to use the technical terms now.
That's fine.
Yeah, they have an incentive to see that the portfolio companies succeed. This is because they have skin in the game. They have obtained money from investors whom they must account to. So they are required to ensure that they do well in the portfolio companies. So that's an advantage as opposed to, let's say they're like, a loan. Okay, they give you the money, leave you to do whatever you want to. And yes, things may not go the way it's intended to go. Thirdly, which is very important, an offshoot of private equity funding is that the investee companies or the portfolio companies tend to benefit from industry experience of the fund and the fund managers. The fund managers usually would have a lot of experience and will partner with management of the investee companies to provide technical training, support, etc. These usually benefit the growth of the investee companies. Unlike, again, for the traditional means of funding, like the banks or other, loans, etc. When they give you the money, usually there's minimal involvement from the financier. And as opposed to this one, they kind of work more closely with you hand in hand to ensure that your business is a success.
Any cons? All those are pros. Any
cons? Okay, I'll tell you what they say the cons are. I don't think these are necessarily cons, but I'll tell you what they say the cons are. People are concerned about dilution of the ownership. Okay, we are used to a situation where I own 100% of the shares and I walk around feeling like I own this company, it's mine, I'm the sole owner of it. So when the private equity company invests, they take shares, they take up shares in the company, okay? When they do that, of course, your shareholding is limited. And for these business owners, some of them feel it is a disadvantage. That's why I say that's what they say. I don't think it is, because even when your stake is smaller, but the company is doing better, revenues are higher, ultimately dividends are great or will be greater. So you can have a smaller chunk of the pie in terms of shareholding, but your dividends ultimately at the end of the day will be greater than if you owned it 100%. And so that's why I say I don't know if it's a disadvantage, but yes, these are some of the things that people complain about. Another thing is loss of management control. Usually when a private equity comes in, like I said, unlike the traditional forms of financing, they're involved in how it's run because they have a personal incentive to see that it succeeds. So usually they'll take over parts or most of the management of the investee company or the portfolio company. And this is something that investee companies or portfolio companies are not very happy with, because they tend to sometimes hire, fire, change management team, etc. And sometimes people are not too happy with it, I'd say. Another disadvantage, I don't think it's very common, but yes, it can be, that sometimes when companies have to exit, talking about the funds, when they have to exit the funds, they would have to, like I think we said earlier, that there's always an exit plan, or there's always an exit. So usually they would have to do something we call trade sales, secondary sales, etc. There are times, you sell to another shareholder, you sell to an incoming shareholder or somebody that wants to come in.
Basically,
in certain country, sorry?
Basically, you sell it to anybody to offload
it, exactly.
And exit.
Yes. Like, in certain places where capital markets is doing great, you can list the company and things like that. But sometimes it's not always easy to get these people. So sometimes liquidation might be the only viable option, because that's the only way. Liquidation is where, just for the benefit of those who don't know what liquidation is winding up your business, closing your business, so that if they are credited, they can be paid.
Why would liquidation come up? So I understand you, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So a private equity fund goes into a company, possibly a distressed company,
Mm-hmm.
and they try to save it. Will liquidation come in when they can't save it? They give up essentially after a certain number of years. We can't save it, so let's.
Well, yes, to an extent, and I'll explain. Usually, when the investor, let me use the proper words. When the fund goes into the portfolio company, there's always an investment objective. There's a strategy.
Yeah.
There's a goal, and the purpose of that is to ensure that the business does well to generate income within the time frame set for itself. If it's unable to do that, then maybe liquidation is an option. But I'll tell you this: liquidation will not be an option if the company is viable, even if it's hard to find someone to sell your shares to. But the thing is, if the company is doing well, it's easier to find someone to sell your shares to. So it's usually a company that's not doing too great that would find it hard to offload their shares.
All right. So my next question, you've already talked about the licensed private equity funds in Ghana. So my next question is, who can invest? Because we talked about investors, funds, and investee companies, or I think you said portfolio companies.
Portfolio companies
can invest in a private equity fund in Ghana.
Okay. So not everyone can invest in a private equity fund.
Even if they had $1 million, some rich man in cantonments.
Well, if the SEC thinks you are you are the right person, yes, they can definitely prescribe that. Yes, you are allowed to, but generally not everyone. The SEC has defined a group of or a category of people they call qualified investors. These are the people that are allowed to invest in PE funds. So they include there are a number of them. I may not actually, it won't be exhaustive. So I'll just say what I can remember off the top of my head. So government institutions such as the banks, the central bank, pension funds, private pension funds, that's in Ghana, and also pension funds, non-Ghanaian pension funds, but that are authorized or licensed pension funds in whatever jurisdiction they are, operating in. There's approved persons on the securities exchange. there are, I think, authorized financial institutions or banks in Ghana and in any other country. So once you are regulated as a bank in another jurisdiction, wherever you are coming from, you're a qualified investor, there are unit trusts, mutual funds, etc. Insurance businesses as well, both international and Ghanaian. And I think you asked about a $1 million man who can, yes, to an extent. So individuals who have proven liquid assets in an amount specified by SEC.
Oh, so it can change.
Yes, are allowed or can be, qualified investors, also individuals who meet a certain criteria in respect of knowledge of the capital markets as defined by SEC, or anybody that the SEC designates as being should I say, a qualified investor, an individual can do so. In practice and in reality though, so these are people whom or these are people that the law says can invest, but in reality, for Ghana, most of the people are the pension funds. We have like Axis, we have Petra investing, we have development finance companies, Northfund, IFC, BII, that's British International Investments. We have DG and VCTF. I can never talk about private equity in Ghana without talking about venture, without talking about the venture capital.
I always get confused about why a private equity fund is named for venture capital, but that's for another day. Or do they do both?
Yes, they do both. If we have time, I mean, we can answer that if we have time. So I'll leave that to you.
Okay,
if
so
you think,
let's park it for now.
Yes, we should. We can. If there's time, we'll do that. And in Ghana, it's not too common to see people like yourselves, high net worth individuals. But yes, they can if the.
For the record, there's somebody else sitting in this room, and she was looking at that person when she said that.
Yeah.
So my next question is hot industries. On fire. So what kind of businesses or industries are currently obtaining private equity funding in Ghana? What are the hot areas? I suspect something IT or fintech will be in there, but what are the industries?
It's difficult to identify, but I'd say a general trend we've seen: agribusiness, light manufacturing, education, financial services. And you are right, in recent times, technology. Yeah. But ultimately, the funds will look for businesses that have aggressive growth potential due to the fact that they really have a short investment lifespan. Okay. They have, like I said, on average of 10 years. They are not looking to invest in a company that will take 30 years to, so these are what they would look at.
All right. I was going to ask you for examples of companies that have successfully sourced private equity funding, but upon second thought, let me skip that and move to my...
Yes, I'll leave that. But there are a few of them I shouldn't say a few. That's
success stories.
Yes. We know Petra Trust, we know Axis, we know Baltic, Lisa Freak. We know.
You can say that they were at this level, and after the private equity funding, they kind of went.
They are success stories. Okay. I think everybody will tell you. I'm sure the fund managers will say that. I'm sure the funds will say that. I'm sure the shareholders will say that. Okay. Yeah, so that's.
I'll take your word for it and move on to my next question.
You can also ask them for their financial statements. Okay,
so next, obviously, a private equity fund would have certain standards which a business must meet before they invest in it. And I know it will change from circumstance to circumstance and fund to fund and even business to business. But what are some of these standards generally that they would look for?
Okay. Definitely profitability, growth potential, very, very important. Maybe track record of management team, reputation of current shareholders, the existing shareholders before they get on board. business module, the export potential, especially for some like agri businesses or light manufacturing. And in recent times, ESG compliance, because a lot of investors will invest in funds that comply with or that have ESG standards that they're complying with, and which would mean that the persons they are investing in or companies they are investing in are also complying with these ESG standards. And yeah, regulatory compliance.
Do a podcast on ESG in Ghana one of these days.
Yeah, but I'll tell you another thing. Funds do not seek perfect companies. Once they see a good potential and they think they can work with you, they are usually ready to step in and help you tidy up your business. If there are non-fatal matters, such as your governance, management issue, if you're not ESG compliant, they put things like that, policies in place to help you reach wherever they want you to get to before the investment comes in. So yeah, these are considerations, but it's not like absolute.
Okay, excuse me. So I guess my follow-on question is, since they are obviously putting money and sometimes substantial, huge money into somebody's business, I expect a private equity investment fund to want to have a certain degree of control. I think you've actually mentioned it over the business for the time they are in it. What are some of the controls they would typically seek or ask for?
Okay, which is understandable, right?
Totally.
Because it's people's money.
Yes, totally.
So that's for board representation. That's to have a seat or seats on the board. They'll ask for reserved matters. Reserved matters, I'll explain for those that don't understand, that they want to be able to have an input or a say in certain decisions that are made. So even if they are not a majority shareholder, they want to say that before you take this decision, I want to okay it before it can be done. Okay, so these are some of the things they can ask for. They can ask for management control. Sometimes they decide that they want the CFO, they want to appoint the CFO, CEO, whoever it is. They can ask for certain rights, contractual rights. We have contractual rights that we call, some of them are like drag along rights, tag along rights, which means that if I want to go out of the company, exit, I can take other shareholders along with me.
Basically, if force them to sell.
Exactly. Whoever I'm selling my shares to. That's drag. Tag along is also, if you are going, I will go with you, but mostly you'd have drag along. Okay. And they would also want a right of first refusal of maybe transfer of shares. So that if you are an existing shareholder and you are transferring your shares, they want to have a first right to say I'll buy it or not before you sell to an incoming person. They want to have that right. So these are some of the things that they would ask for contractually.
I find the reserved matters very interesting, potentially scary if I were to be a business owner.
Yeah.
So I guess it would be a contest between what I want to reserve to a private equity, the directors put in my company by a private equity fund, although they are the minority, and how desperate I am for the money. Reserved rights matters sounds scary.
It's really not that bad. I'll tell you what, because most funds are well managed. So I don't think they act, I don't know what word to use. They will take decisions that will adversely affect the business of the portfolio company. So it's really not that scary. It's just that traditionally our businesses are used to holding on to it. It's my company. I can get up things without passing resolutions, without going through the right channel. So it seems scary for them, but it really isn't. It really isn't that bad.
So I guess another follow-on question is, you said that some of the participants in private equity funding are pension funds. So we're dealing with people's pensions and all, which is a very serious and delicate matter in Ghana and all other countries. So I guess that's why is the reason, if I may say so, there needs to be regulation. So who regulates private equity in Ghana, and how do they do it, really?
Private equity in Ghana is regulated
Is there
primarily.
one regulator for starters?
So primarily by the SEC. That's the Securities and Exchange Commission. I mentioned SEC earlier. I didn't explain, so that's what it means.
Yeah.
For starters, all fund managers are required to be licensed by SEC. They are supposed to meet a fit and proper test, and the SEC will look at certain things in determining whether they meet the fit and proper test. They look at their reputation, character, their qualifications, etc. Also, the fund itself, aside the fund manager, must also be licensed by the SEC. The SEC will look at what the fund intends to do, amongst other things, the management of the fund, etc. In addition to licensing, the funds also have reporting requirements. They are required to submit reports, yearly, half-yearly reports to the SEC, such as their statements of asset liabilities, etc. I will tell you something. It's something that the funds are not particularly pleased about because it's private money, and it actually discourages some investors from investment. You would think that, SEC would say that, well, it's people's money, we need to give them confidence, but the people is like, it's our money. We haven't asked you to protect us. You see, if you look at the category of people who the SEC has designated as qualified investors, they are all technical people, know-how, they know what they are doing. That's why the man on the street is not allowed to invest in such a thing, okay?
Even if he has a million.
Even if he has a million, unless SEC has approved that he can. Yeah. So these are people who know a lot, and they're like, it's my money, what I do with it, it's not yours. So yeah, so far, that is that's the regulation. So far, that's the state of the regulation. Beyond SEC, we have the Venture Capital Trust Fund, one of my favorites stakeholders in the industry. It's a state-owned fund that's set up to make investments in private equity and venture capital. It's not a regulator per se, but it's an investor in funds. And what happens is that before you get funding from VCTF, they require you to become subject to some of their policy guidelines on investment. You must meet certain criteria if you want to, in accordance with their act, if you want to get funding from them. So that's why I'll say, so it's not a regulator, but hey, because you need money from them, you have to comply with some of the things that they are. And I think you mentioned the pensions regulator, NPRA. Yes, it's very important because currently pension funds in Ghana, when it comes to investors, pension funds are number one. So if they are investing in the funds, it makes sense that their regulator is interested in it as well.
That should about bring us to the end, except you were talking about venture capital wearing two hats. It seems to be a venture capital fund. It seems to be a private equity fund, because I've always understood venture capital to be a cousin of private equity, except it's kind of interested in startups.
So venture capital is a fund of funds. I'll explain that. It does not invest in portfolio companies directly. It invests in funds.
Who then
invest in funds. So yes, so that's what it does. So when you say in Ghana, we use private equity, we use venture capital loosely, really, but some would say semantic, but there are technical differences. Like technically, venture capital would typically be focused on early stage funding, whereas private equity is more interested in mature businesses once there's growth potential. Okay. Also, traditionally and in certain places, the size of investments also matters to make the distinction. VC tends to be, or PE tends to be higher than VC, but in Ghana, we tend to use them interchangeably, and it's not really an issue.
I'm wondering whether that was a heavy topic or a light topic from my simple mind. I think you did it well.
I hope, yes. I tried very hard to
Bring it to my level.
English because I know your listeners are not all lawyers, are not all like finance people, accountants, so we just have to.
Okay. So there it is, listeners. The ABCs of private equity. Nanaya, thank you very much for the time you've taken to explain this to us. Hopefully we'll have you again on the podcast soon.
Okay.
Nice.
Yes, I'm happy you invited me.
It took you too long. Listeners. Thank you, listeners, for your time. See you again on another episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.